Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for the next panel this morning. We're going to talk about some of the incredible movement that we've seen in just the last year in the presence of phones in schools. It's remarkable. About a year ago, this was not something that was really being discussed quite as much, although there was some activity beginning in the EU. And suddenly this year, it feels like everyone is talking about phone-free schools. I'm very excited to introduce this distinguished panel for this conversation. We have Chris McKenna, who's the founder and the CEO of Protect Young Eyes. We have Dr. Marco Gui, an associate professor at the University of Milano-Bicocca and the co-founder of Patti Digitali. Did I pronounce that right? Yep. All right, cool. We have Dr. Phil McRae, who's an educator and scholar working in Alberta. And we have Julie Scelfo, who's the founder and executive director of Mothers Against Media Addiction, joinmama.org. And I'm Dr. Mitch Prinstein. I'm the Chief Science Officer at the American Psychological Association and the co-director for the Winston Center on Technology Use, Brain, and Psychological Development. So what a year it's been for phones in schools. What do we know about the effects of phones for children when they're using them in the actual classroom setting? Any thoughts about what we're seeing scientifically there?
Yeah, I mean, what we see is that what we've known about young people all along is, well, they struggle to pay attention already, right? We need to capture their attention. And then we, as a society, decided to put a hyper-stimulating device in their pocket, and we asked them to pay attention to things that are already difficult to pay attention. And so scientifically, we've seen for many years what that impact has had on them. 62% less notes taken in a class when that digital device is simply present, or a 13% decrease in grades in taking a test, again, just simply by the presence. I think some of the terminology is used as brain drain, that's simply having the device close by, even if it's not something I'm checking. Neurologically, I'm thinking my attention is going in that direction, and therefore I'm less focused on whatever subject is in front of me. And we've known these things for years. We just haven't done the job of putting those things into practice in the classroom, as you said, until recently. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In Alberta, I represent 50,000 teachers. So I'm the executive staff officer for the profession of teaching, which is 98% of all of our principals and teachers in the province. And one of the things that we've been doing for over a decade is looking at distraction. Mm-hmm. And we've found that every time a device pings a student, gives them an update, in a class of an hour and a half long, they will have between 600 to 800 pings in that classroom. So think about it almost like the secondhand disturbance, like smoking. You might have secondhand effects. So somebody's phone goes off in the middle of the class and the students on either side are distracted. Mm-hmm. So disturbances in classrooms, we've been tracking for some time. Mm-hmm. We've also been more globally seeing a decline in academic performance and issues relating to anxiety and depression in relation to social media and students in schools and some of the aggression issues. So we, in education systems around the world and in Canada, where I'm from, have been really taking a hard look at what the direct implication of a cell phone is to student learning, mental health, and class disturbances.
Mm-hmm. In fact, research has shown that the child who is scrolling the internet during class time gets lower grades, but so does the child sitting behind them.
That's right.
So we see this effect of secondhand screen exposure, as you're saying, on academic performance that affects not just the child whose parents let them, but also the child whose parents don't let them bring a device into school.
Mitch, can I add on to that? Because I think we often, and rightfully so, we talk about grades and distraction and those things in terms of learning outcomes. But the overall culture of the school, I think, is different in ways that are very measurable, right? When you look at the loudness, right? I recently read an article about a large school in Texas who has been phone-free now for 2 years. And the principal was commenting about how loud the hallways are now. But then she had to say, but in a good way, because you have children interacting with each other, looking at each other, and being loud in all the ways that we want teenagers to be loud with each other. But then on the opposite side of that, in terms of disruption, there was a recent New York Times article that looked at 400 different instances of fights, school fights that had happened. And it measured the number of those that had been exasperated because of the organization of those fights via technology during the day. And I actually had somebody through our own social media channels, a teacher. I was talking about Google Docs, right, just as a part of the Google Suite, and how students are not only using those as a part of class, but are also organizing these fights through even something that does have a learning outcome. But that ability to connect in those ways, we just have to be careful so we're not using it in the wrong direction. So.
I'm a parent, and I don't think there's any parent in the world who packs their child's backpack in the morning and puts in some DVDs so they could watch movies and a stack of pornographic magazines and some catalogs so they could do shopping. Right. None of us think that would be a good idea. But if we allow them to take a smartphone, which really is a miniature supercomputer, we are providing them easy access to all of the information in the world. So one of the reasons I was moved to start Mama was because we heard from so many school administrators, principals, teachers. They wanted to get rid of the phones in the classroom, but the biggest obstacle they actually faced was parents. And some parents had fears that what if there was an emergency and they couldn't reach their child? Or, I purchased this, why should the school take ownership of that? So we realized there needed to be a lot of parent education, and that's part of what we do at Mama. We create chapters where parents can get together in their communities, learn about these issues, learn about how smartphones affect social, emotional, and academic progress, and also advocate for safeguards that these devices are not allowed to be as addictive.
Let's talk about that. Sorry, go ahead.
What I see in Italy is that families are asking institutions to take a position, because so far institutions have been neutral. So there are risks, there are benefits. You cannot say a smartphone ban conveys the message that institutions have a position on a certain age, proper age for smartphones, and this helps families even outside school for their family choices, and this is very important.
That's true.
And it has looked different in different parts of the world because each community has its own questions. So how have folks in Europe, in Italy, responded to the bans in the UK, in France, and I believe in the Netherlands? Do you think that's made the Italian community more accepting of a school-wide policy?
I think so. Last year, a ban was established also in Italy. So for primary school and lower secondary schools, smartphones are banned. And this is also helping people to respect the GDPR that states that under 14 social media are not have not to be used by students. So the wave is growing, and we have to channel it in the right direction. Something that is critical at the moment in Italy is digital homework. So you can ban smartphones in schools, but the problem of having a lot of homework to do in the afternoon on digital media is a way in which schools are saying people, your children have to be online permanently. So this is something that has to be restructured in a dialogue between schools and families, I think.
Interesting. You mentioned bans in primary schools. How young are the kids that were bringing phones into the school?
We are seeing, paradoxically, that smartphones arrive earlier when there is a difficult background. From a social, economic point of view, while more affluent, more educated people are delaying a little bit. So you can have a context in which at third grade there are many students with their own smartphones. So this is, there are very different situations depending on the context.
Phil, what happened in Canada? Were people listening to the data and the examples in Europe? Was there some pushback?
I think what's happened is that there's an ecosystem now where communities are welcoming some form of change that's positive. And what we're seeing very quickly is once a smartphone prohibition goes into a school or ban within a school district, the students actually report that they appreciate it. And then the parents, seeing that their students are appreciating it, and from the other community, actually are relieved, because somebody set up some structure, somebody set up some rules to govern what was basically an ungoverned space before this. But probably the biggest change that we're seeing across our communities is that having the conversation about the impact of technology on health, on learning, on physical activity is changing the overall conversation at home as well as at school. And I think for us, that's as teachers, that's just as important, that it's not just during the school day, it's actually throughout the child's entire day. With issues with cyberbullying, we've seen some decrease in that. So, I think taking the lead from others is helpful. Maybe later on we'll talk about some of the data that we're seeing from the ban itself. But it's right now, I think, culturally very hopeful.
Well, let's pivot to the United States. We're seeing more resistance there because, unfortunately, schools in the United States experience a unique phenomenon, which is tragic school shootings. And that has changed many parents' feelings about the ability to contact their kids. Any thoughts?
Sure, I get asked this question all the time, and my background is as a journalist. I spent 20 years as a journalist, so I began wondering, do phones make a child safer? And I contacted many security experts, law enforcement, and in an emergency, the number one thing a child needs to do is pay attention to the teacher, because the teacher and the school has prepared for an emergency. And the presence of a smartphone actually makes the child less safe, because it might distract them, they might want to call their parents, and in a, God forbid, a situation where you need to make split-second decisions, the child needs to pay attention. So one of the things we do at Mama is parent education and talk about this to make sure parents understand that. And we had a very interesting experience. One of our first members at our very first meeting got up and she said, smartphones have brought so many terrible things, but the one good thing is I can contact my child in an emergency. Well, her son's school had a practice drill for a shooting. Like, they didn't tell the children that, but it was an emergency, and he started texting her. And after 25 minutes of texting, she realized that in an emergency, there's nothing she could do, and that it was kind of crazy that this had happened. So she got up at the next meeting and said to all parents, look, this makes no sense. This is our own issue. Yeah. And really, with so much of this culture, it's about the parents' behavior and the parents' own anxiety. So, the world has been feeling more and more unsafe because we have 24-hour media, we have social media that is designed to engage you, and the best way to get engagement is by constantly talking about conflict, by constantly showing you the worst things that are happening. But really, there's never been a safer time to be alive in all of human history. People are living longer, we have emergency services. So, adults, especially in the United States, carry so much anxiety. And unfortunately, we're transferring that to our children. So I think part of tackling this phone addiction in adults is by reminding everybody to calm down, that everything is not an emergency. And in fact, a critical part of learning how to be in this world is learning how to tolerate frustration, not being able to solve every problem instantaneously, and how to slow down and be in communication and see what the right tool is to communicate and address the problem in time.
Yeah, to build on that a little bit, I say this to parents, and it's almost like this aha moment that we as parents and as caregivers have been groomed to need to know. Right? You look at the types of applications we even use with our children, whether it's Life 360 or others. We have trained ourselves to need moment-by-moment feedback on where our children are. When in fact, one of the best things for our children to develop resilience, to know how to interact and to figure things out with a spirit of independence and human-to-human interaction, is to not be involved in their lives all of the time. And so to your point, I think we're a big part of that. Not only is it when it comes to those active shooter situations or other lockdown situations, one of the things that a principal shared with me, yes, we want their full attention and paying attention to those who are getting them out and safe, but he said in a recent incident, one of the things that created the most problem was in this situation, this lockdown, what he had at a large high school, a secondary school, were 1,000 different children sharing 1,000 different versions on their phones of what was going on. And what he did for the next month was deal with all kinds of misinformation from parents and all the different questions they had because of the different, sometimes completely different and untrue versions of what was going on through the eyes of a teenager without the context through an SMS message that then the principal was dealing with afterwards. So there's all of that downstream impact. In those situations, we actually need fewer people talking and creating fewer stories so there's less mess afterwards.
And in the emergency, God forbid, 2,000 students start calling 911. That can block the most important calls from getting through, and it can prevent the emergency services and the plan. So really, parents need to be educated about, how well schools are prepared for emergencies. And as you said, butting out and letting kids have their experience at school. There's nowhere safer for children to learn to separate from parents than at school.
So a quick response from each of you on the best way to take phones out of the school setting. We're seeing a wide variety of tactics. Some talk about a bell-to-bell restriction. So in other words, the phone should not even be brought to school at all. It should never be turned on. Some talk about phones out of classroom time, but it's okay during the lunch period and in the moments between classes. Some have phone-free safe zones at school and areas where it's okay to use the phone. Any thoughts or recommendations on what's the best way to advocate, what's the best way do you think to get phones out of the school? Quick thoughts.
I think it depends on the age. If we talk about primary and lower secondary schools, as I said, the message has also a consequence on family choices. So the important thing is that school is saying that this is not a proper device for that specific age, and so the message is conveyed for family choices. When we talk about secondary schools, the things are different. We have a legal framework that let students use their smartphones, so things could be different. As Mitch said, I co-founded this network called Patti Digitali. It is a network of 130 family groups spread throughout Italy, and they're trying to reflect on the different stages and different choices that schools together with families have to make in different developmental stages. Many critics of the movement say that we are not preparing children for their online life, so that we're not developing skills for their life. So one thing we have to reflect on is really what is the preparation while they wait for their personal smartphone, which is the best one to prepare them for their online life.
I tend to be a little bit more black and white. I've been accused of that. And if we're making this decision based on what's best for them, what's best for their learning, then I tend to lean more toward a strict bell-to-bell. We get to use them during passing time and also during cafeteria time. I have found schools who have done that, who then try to roll that back, because what they find is the moment the child leaves the classroom or the moment they sit down at the table with their friends, you now have 8 people eating lunch while also buried, and you're now not fostering that face-to-face interaction. I just worked with a school that they had called themselves phone-free, yet they allowed them to interact, and they wanted to then roll that back because they were not seeing the type of interaction they wanted. Now, I think that can look a lot of different ways. From a resource perspective, not every school can invest in the pouches or other maybe more physical hardware mechanisms that create that physical separation. I have seen some schools who, if you tell them it has to be in their locker or it has to be in their backpack and it's strictly enforced, it's visibly enforced, where kids who are not going along with that and taking their phones out, other kids see that there's a punishment that goes along with that. That can work, but that always starts to move into those who are being sneaky the more access you give them. And so I tend to want to, if we're going to say phone free, and if we're basing it on outcomes, then let's make it phone free and get them away from the students to create as little distraction as possible. And that's tends to be where I land.
At Mama, we're with Chris. We absolutely believe it has to be bell to bell. There are so many important experiences that children need to have that inform their learning, not just academically. You know, in the prior panel, I heard the phrase that I hear repeated a lot, nothing for us without us. And I think it is important to hear youth voices, but I also think that it's our obligation as parents and adults to provide the environment for children that's best for them. I don't ask my child what age he should start drinking alcohol or read pornography or go gambling. You know, we as adults know that there are developmental things need to happen before children are ready for certain experiences. So, you know, I'd love to ask the audience, you know, we all want our children to grow up to be safe drivers, but how many of them think we should start driver's ed at age 7? Or 8, anyone? You know, we want our children to have a healthy sex life when they get older, but we don't think we should start at 9 years old encouraging children to be sexually active. So there are certain developmental things that need to happen before we provide the tools, and certainly media literacy education could start in kindergarten at an age-appropriate way.
Absolutely.
So we share your view, it should be bell to bell, and we share your view that we need to prepare children for functioning in a digital world, but that doesn't automatically mean giving them access to smartphones for 9 hours a day.
So one of the things, Canada is a very diverse nation of different cultures and populations. And that diversity is actually a source of our intelligence as a country. And we try and respect the choice and voice and stake that people have in those many different cultural spaces. So to have a sustainable solution, what we did in Alberta is we actually had many, many community conversations before a legal ban went into place. And in those conversations, what we learned is there are some conditions in schools where we will want to have some flexibility. So for example, medical needs. So if a student, let's say, has a diabetes pump and that phone gives them a signal, we want to be mindful of some of those health conditions. So when we developed the prohibition, we developed it within our communities. The teachers voted on it. 9 in 10 said this is the way to go forward. The government then, about 6 months later, because all of these community conversations had taken place, they said this is an easy win because the society is with this policy, adopted it for the school system. And what we've seen is that it seems to be a sustainable solution, but we do have to have some flexibility because if a child has a medical need, we want to be mindful of some of those nuances. Yeah. And we also want this to last. We want this to be something that will go, it won't just be a flash in the pan with a pushback. And so far, in the last 6 months, since it's now a legal requirement in Alberta, we see nothing but positivity coming from our parents as partners, from the teachers, and actually from the wider community, which is important because when you have many different cultures with different perspectives, once they feel that they've had a choice and a voice and a stake in the decision, that decision then lasts over time.
It does.
And thank you for saying that. I mean, in all of Mama's written materials, we have an asterisk by the bell to bell because there's medical conditions, there's a neurodivergency, there's many situations that there should be exceptions. But
if I can ask you a question, what do you think of flip phones instead of smartphones until a certain age? Because within the network of Patti Digitali, we had some experiences with flip phones, and they worked if there were a number of students adopting them. But the thing is, you have to build a cultural change to accept a choice like this.
I'll say we had a Mama chapter leader in Florida who did something wild and crazy. She got a landline in her house, and she convinced a dozen of her friends to get landlines, and she taught her child how to use the phone. Now, this sounds really old-fashioned, but to make a phone call to a stranger requires some bravery when you're young. You need to learn how to use manners. You need to learn how to talk to an adult, perhaps, because it might not be your friend, it might be their father or their mother, and they are learning all these new skills. So these children are now using the landline, calling one another, and going out to play. So, I mean, I think the flip phone is a wonderful solution, you know, and I think it's always smart to ask, what is the problem to which the technology is the solution, right? So the flip phone enables them to communicate, enables parents to get in touch. I mean, certainly as you raised in a diverse community and you've seen in your research, there's a wide variation in different economic populations. So in low-income communities, we have many teenagers who serve as caregivers in their families. They have jobs after schools, and they're worried if they cannot get updates on their phone or their boss cannot contact them, that can have significant economic impacts for their families. So, you know, there does need to be conversation. You know, Canada's such a model for all of us, and that input from the community, that buy-in really makes a huge difference.
Yeah, I think that conversation is really important. And if you've discovered that in your community, that there are families that are willing to come together to do that, I think that can be powerful. My younger sister is an educator in New York public schools. And to your point, she has a number of immigrant families, those who have come into New York and who are also caregivers, who are also having jobs in order to support their family. And she has said to her students, this is sort of her phrase, I'm not ridiculous. Like, that's, as a teacher, if you have a need, right? She's created conversations with her students. If you have a specific need related to your family, whether it's a flip phone or a smartphone, she wants her students to know, I'm not ridiculous. I want your family to prosper and I want to take care of you. But that only comes from that kind of conversation taking place. I think that's so important.
My 14-year-old daughter, I recommended to her that we get her a flip phone. She rolled her eyes about as much as she's ever rolled her eyes, said, I would not be caught dead with a flip phone in front of other kids. So, you know, it's interesting how different cultures are willing to do different things. Let me ask you, we're talking about all of these changes to the school environment because we hope that it will help child outcomes. But science is slow, so we're only now just getting some hints as to whether any of these changes might actually benefit youth. Are there any signals in the emerging data that tell us whether taking phones away is actually helping youth?
So, I don't know how many journalists are in here, but Dr. Prinstein and I have collaborated on what we believe is the largest study now of teachers post-cell phone ban. And we have some data that we looked at earlier this morning from 2,000 randomly sampled teachers out of our 50,000. And we can say very definitively that there are 3 clear positive outcomes that are being perceived in the last 6 months. The first is the disturbances are down by 77% in classrooms. So that's a huge indicator. If you have 600 to 800, you know, knocking on the door of a child's attention, to reduce that is a significant change. The second, and for me, really compelling finding, is that 66% of our teachers and school leaders, our principals, are saying that mental health is improving across the schools in our province. Now, we are living through a mental health pandemic, generally, post-COVID. So to see anything that can help to give resilience to youth, to help them bounce back from adversity and support their mental well-being, that's really important. And the third, that will probably impress parents and government most, is that the academic achievement is improving.
That's right.
So we're seeing about 57% of the schools randomly sampled saying that achievement, academic achievement, has improved. So if disturbances are down, mental well-being is improving, and academic achievement is improving, the reinforcement of the move that we've made to have this in schools, I think it just strengthens the evidence. And then we hope to soon have this published in some academic journals, and we'll be doing some press releases probably in Canada shortly on this.
Wow,
I-
that's fabulous. Yeah.
I think we should also consider the perception of teachers and parents, that it's also relevant evidence. And in Milano, we administered a big survey to parents and teachers, and the vast majority is in favor of bans. And in particular, there is a 3 years gap between the actual age in which parents give a smartphone to their children and the age they consider a proper age, if you ask them about that. So this gap has to be filled in some ways. There is a perception that something is needed, but we lack a social norm that can empower this, that can enforce this. So institutions, parents, and schools have to work to establish this social norm that currently is lacking.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, quite a bit of the work that we do at Protect Young Eyes is more boots on the ground, working in schools, talking to students and talking to parents in that school environment. And just anecdotally, the things that I'm hearing very much are in support of those outcomes that you have the data for. I was recently at a meeting of superintendents from a particular type of school across the United States. And the largest school in Texas just went phone free back in September of this past year. And football, and well, American football and other athletics are very big there at this school. And what they reported is that just in their fall sports, academic probations for their athletes were down 40%. They don't have direct ties, they can't prove, but it's a very interesting correlation that the fall that they ban schools during the class time and also during passing time is also when they see their athletes who have a lot on their plates already performing better in the classroom. Another one, which is just a story that I think is just good to hear when it comes to mental health. There's a large public school system in Michigan where I'm from, over 11,000 students that has been phone free for a few years now. The superintendent, his name is Dan Beam, he has conversations with the students. He wants to know how it's going. And he sat down at a lunch table with a bunch of middle school girls, right? I'm sure there was a lot of conversation going on already. And he sat down and he calls this soup with the super. And he does this to sit down and have conversations with students. And he asked a particular 8th grade girl what she thought about removing phones from secondary school, from middle and from high school. And she said, you know, Mr. Beam, last year when I was in 7th grade, it took me over an hour to get ready for school every single day because I thought somebody might take my picture. And she said, the best thing about this ban is now I can be me. Right? I mean, isn't that just a beautiful statement from a young girl who now feels like she can just come to school without all of the prep, just on the off chance that someone with a phone might take her photo during the day, right? I just think that was just such a way to see, yes, that makes a difference to her mental health, her anxiety every single day.
We need the research. It's incredibly helpful to be able to provide these metrics of what happens when the phones are banned from school. But another part of me feels like we already have centuries of research that tells us that whatever you expose a child to, they become. Psychologists have known for many decades that if a child grows up in a household where there is violence, where there is abuse, they are more likely to experience trauma and mental health problems. And we know if children are growing up with 9 hours a day, being exposed to constant interruptions, being exposed to content that's developmentally inappropriate. I did a appearance on a show with a young man in the audience, and the host, it was Oprah Winfrey. Oprah called on the young man and she said, you know, what do you not like about social media? And he was 15 years old. And he said, you know, sometimes I just want to see what my friends are doing, but there's videos of really horrible things. Like I saw a dead body once. One time there was a video of a car crash, and he said, you know, once I watched an execution. And this child was one child, and this content has been distributed at scale to our children globally. So it's no surprise that if we take away some of this content, if we make children spend less time in an environment that is designed to disrupt them, that is designed to show them anything that will arouse intense emotions, if they spend more time interacting with friends, they're going to have a warmer, healthier, more conducive experience for good mental health. And then there are all the other parts of it, as you mentioned with the fights. You know, I've talked to principals who say it's not just that the fights are happening. You know, they have schools that with gang members that are organizing, you know, inviting other gangs to come to the school and have a fight, but that children now, if they have access to phones, they will film the fights instead of intervening. You know, in my childhood, people would try to stop the fight. Now, children are all pulling out their cameras and recording it so they can post it to social media, and some are even planning these things. So if that's the environment that children are growing up in, we're teaching them really antisocial skills as opposed to good social skills. So, you know, we need the research. I am so excited about your study, and we need more of it. And also, I think there's so much of existing evidence that we know what kinds of environments are best for children.
I just want to jump on something that Julie said that is really important. And that's something that young people are increasingly lonely. They feel alone together. And a lot of that is because they're in their, you know, they have 1,000 friends, but they don't really have 1,000 friends. And one of the things that we've started to see, especially in our high schools, is the art of conversation is coming back. The ability to look somebody in the eye, to talk to them, to actually learn how to eat lunch together and talk with each other. And that, I think, if you know, here we are at the World Economic Forum, if you want to talk about skills for the future, that's a really important skill, is the social emotional interaction. In a world that's going to be increasingly defined by artificial intelligence and automation, if you talk about a curriculum, the curriculum of just being able to have that highly relational experience is important. So there's a lot of things around this that we know are really positive, that the anecdotes and the stories are coming up with, that we're starting to hear at scale as well. But bringing back that art of conversation, things that we may take for granted as Gen Xers or, you know, others who've had that experience, we can't take that for granted anymore. We actually have to build and design spaces where people are able to learn how to interact and socialize together.
Yeah, and just on what you said there, it's not just removing the phones. I think I heard Jonathan Haidt say one time in an interview, it's also giving them back the gift of each other and creating those environments. So it's one thing to say, well, we've had phones in schools for years, now we're taking them out. But it's another thing then to engage the students to say, how can we create a learning environment that points you back toward each other? And working with students to actually be a part of that solution. I worked with one school that, as a part of their junior and seniors, they had leaders and they actually took them shopping. The school took them shopping to buy furniture for a space, and the school agreed to open up the school earlier during the day, and they called it the hang up, hang out space. And they had signs up on the tables and comfortable couches where the students could come ahead of class time. They helped build this space so they could hang up their phones. You're almost judged if you have your phone out in this space so that they can hang out with each other and actually learn how to interact again. I just thought that was a beautiful manifestation of that.
Well, the science supports what you're saying. We're seeing increases in social anxiety, kids that have lost the ability to interact spontaneously. We also know that a device in school is providing a distraction that adults feel we can handle through multitasking. There's no such thing as multitasking.
No.
It's task shifting. And adolescents are not as good at task shifting as are adults. So we know that adolescents, it's logical. Take the devices out of the school. We're starting to see improvements. Let's make it a little bit more complicated, though, for a second. What about watches? A lot of parents are starting to send their kids in with watches. And maybe even more complicated than that, what about the devices the school is giving to the kids to use for classroom-based education? But in some cases, those iPads or those laptops can be used to surf social media or do whatever they would like.
Now
think-
you've really opened it up,
Yeah,
Mitch.
here we
Yeah, now you really,
There are meta-analyses that show positive impacts of specific uses, for example, of an iPad for a specific learning goal. And I can imagine that there is a benefit if someone learns something in that moment, confined in a certain moment with the guidance of a teacher. But this is something completely different compared to having a personal device the whole day and carrying out all the activities, school activities with that. So we have to distinguish these two situations even in the meta-analysis. So the impact of having personal devices against the impact of using for a certain period and with the guidance of teacher a device in the classroom. So these are very different things.
they are. Yeah.
So in New York State, we have started talking about children's right to distraction-free learning. And the reason for that is because the governor recently announced her intention to introduce a law to ban smartphones in schools, but it's not just smartphones, it's also smartwatches. If we don't include the smartwatches or all individual personal devices to distinguish them from the ones issued from school, we're right back in the same place. And it's important to use that language because right now it's phones and watches, but in another year it could be glasses, it could be hats, the technology can migrate to any type of thing. So really it's about giving children the opportunity to be focused with real world experiences and interactions, which is the language that Mama uses. But we all made a noise when you said that because we have a bigger crisis, which is this issue of what's called education technology. And more schools have adopted one-to-one policies. They call it one-to-one, meaning every child has a device. More and more schools are using technology to teach. But one of our chapter leaders, Nikki Reisberg, who runs a podcast called Scrolling to Death, if you listen to her podcast, she has recently shown examples of how the school provided iPad did not block YouTube. And after watching one video on YouTube, her child was sent videos about how to harm yourself, how to cut yourself. I highly recommend James Bridle's TED Talk. It's more than a decade old. He calls it the nightmare of children's YouTube because the algorithms can quickly take any subject and will send you the most extreme, distorted version of that, so if children stay on it. But when it comes to educators, my youngest child just started at a very well respected kind of elite private school in New York that's over 100 years old. One of his teachers, a Spanish teacher, gave him an assignment to write a rap song in Spanish, which I thought was a great assignment. But when she sent him the music for the song, she did not sing it in class or send a music file. She gave him a YouTube video. And I was very frustrated about this because the second you send a child onto a platform that is designed to be addictive, how much harder are you making it for the child to pay attention, as you mentioned, with all the interruptions?
If I can add
So we just have a large need to change the culture around this and that the way we think about technology for children.
I want to add on this because I think we have to extend the discussion to free autonomous internet navigation. So this is something that is not desirable for children and pre-adolescents. So they can use the internet when there is a safe environment, when there is guidance by parents and educators. Smartphones or watches or even PCs, it's, a similar question. The thing is, the internet as a free tool to use without limitations is not apt for certain ages.
Yeah, definitely. And what we're missing, I think, broadly, globally, certainly in the United States, is a framework that's focused on outcomes. I love the terminology, a distraction-free learning environment. It's not a phone ban. We're just creating policies that support a distraction-free learning environment, whether it's the personal devices or the, quote, educational technology, which can be as much a part of the distraction as possible. And unfortunately, because of online learning and all the kids moving home for a little while, we just rushed technology instead of asking the question, what kinds of uses, what kinds of devices are actually going to achieve educational outcomes with what we're giving them to learn on. And we're finally starting to see some movement there, but these are two very different conversations. In fact, I often hear parents in the States talk about, once we get the personal devices out of school, then we're going to get the technology out of the classroom, right? So it's phone-free schools and low-tech classrooms, not anti-technology, but again, uses of technology that are focused on outcomes that are transformative and supportive instead of disruptive and harmful on the very things they're supposed to be learning on.
So I know there are many questions, so I'd like to give you all a chance to ask those. While the microphone is getting to you, a few things that you can do immediately to help your school environment. Ask the teachers to make assignments due at 9 p.m., not at midnight, because that encourages kids to be on their device until midnight. Ask that coaches and extracurricular activities are not organized via social media, but they're organized using email or some other method. So these are things that can be done because we accidentally are encouraging our kids onto their devices by making some rules that unwittingly is contributing to the problem. Yes.
Hi. You are here, of course, have so many contacts to teachers. What I see, not only in Switzerland, but for example in Sweden. Sweden now, since September, kicked out all devices from the school until the age of 12. Not only smartphone, and Sweden was the first country who many years ago kicked out all books, and the children were only educated on devices, on iPads. So now they switch completely. But I have a friend in Stockholm, and you know what she says to me? Her daughter in the school, she is kind of banging with her head to get smartphone. Why? In the school now they don't have it, but all these children after the school are running home to dive again to this digital world. They are not going out. To going out, it means to open smartphone. There is no physical contact after school. So, and additionally, of course, there's a homework online. I have in Switzerland, for example, teachers who work for me. She comes from another school, Swiss school, where the children also, everything is online from the age now, 9 years old. And even the parents, they divided because of a weekend. What to do on weekend? There's a homework, but there's iPads where the children, they don't see their children. They are just sitting at home with iPads. What are they doing? Each time, of course, parents ask, it's homework. Parents cannot control it. So what teachers can do about the homework at home with these iPads? Because it is really, most of the time, children are not in the school. Right. They are at home, in the front of this. So we are helping, of course, a lot by protecting the school. But we still have a huge problem, not only by smartphone, because of parents they cannot say no, but also the homework. What is the solution?
I'll take a crack at this. So this is Dr. Phil's 3 Bs. And it's something that I talk to parents about. And I think at the home environment, this is a really good, it's a general rule for everything. It's to be mindful, to be present, and to be balanced. So those are the 3. Mm-hmm. So when it's to be mindful, think about the age of your child and what's important developmentally. I remember when there were these advertisements about put the iPad in front of the child and when they're a baby and they'll be Einstein, which is completely Einstein, ridiculous. Yes. They need to play. Play is learning. Play is creativity. So think about being mindful of what age are those children and what is needed developmentally, like nutrition. The issue of being present is to participate with the child if they are on the iPad, to actually be there to see what's going on, because then you know as a parent, is it homework, is it not homework? Because oftentimes, oh, I'm doing, it's not what necessarily is being said. So being present is also somewhat important, but more presence is actually without the device. That's, I think, important.
It is practically impossible for most of the parents to be all the time
To see, yeah.
the side of the child. It is
Yeah, and I think that's where the balance comes in. Know what the child is doing and when they're doing. So, for example, we see a lot of families that have screens on during dinner, or devices out during dinner, and the mimetic effect of a child seeing an adult with their device out when you're to be eating, and that's a very protective space for a family, is to eat together and to find out what happened in the day. So being balanced means, what is the time of day that they have that exposure for homework or for other things? Because I think using an iPad as a digital baby rattle, as a pacifier, that's a problem. Or a phone, or whatever the device is. It doesn't matter the device. I think the being mindful of the age of the child and what's needed developmentally, being present in terms of the relational, and then being balanced, the dinner time and then bedtime. Letting children have devices during kind of that later at night, nocturnal screen time, huge problem. Problem for sleep quality and quantity. So at least trying to give parents a structure to think about. The homework, just as a teacher, I can tell you that my philosophy on homework is that it's ideal to try and get things done during the school day, not to load up with homework. But that's a pedagogical teacher,
Right.
Dr. Phil,
And a
saying
good
it.
one.
So
I agree with everything you're saying, and I have an additional idea to add, which is, I have 3 children. They were born 5 years apart. I thought that they could operate these devices safely, and then I could, supervise and do all these things. And it completely overwhelmed me. And I realized it just wasn't humanly possible to monitor everything they were seeing. And that's one of the things that led me to create Mama. What I realized is that we really needed a culture shift, and that parents need support to implement these new norms and be with like-minded parents who share their views, so that collectively we can change the world to provide children with a healthy set of friends and community where there's lots of opportunities for them to go out and play and interact. Kind of like you had mentioned on setting up these groups, we are setting up chapters. We had hoped to be in 6 states by the end of last year, which was our first year. Instead, we're now in 17 states, and we have 28 chapters. We have requests to open up chapters all over the world because parents desperately want the information and the tools to know how to go talk to their school and get them to set these limits. They want to know how to contact their elected leaders to make sure that these products have safeguards so that they're not completely addictive, and if a child does have access, that they're not sent information that we all agree is harmful. And they need the collective reinforcement that they know their child can go to other people's houses, and that they alone don't have to be the only person who says to their 10-year-old, no, you're not getting a phone yet, you have to wait. So I agree that we need the balance, and I think that we need sort of to work collectively to make these changes in our schools and our communities.
And sometimes it's as simple as giving the parents just a simple tool like an email template to send to teachers to ask questions. Do they even have a say in the amount of homework that is given through a device versus could be given other ways? Sometimes parents just don't even know how to construct that message. There's a fear in that. And some of the things that we have found helpful at Protect Young Eyes, I know you have some of the same resources at Mama, is to simply say, no, here, you can copy and paste this email and send it to teachers just to see what options you have that maybe don't include being on an iPad until 11 p.m. I'm so sorry, I know you wanted to say
I know
something.
Marco has a comment. We know we have many other questions that we're going to get to.
Very quick. Patti, Digitali gives 2 concrete recommendations to schools concerning digital homework. One is to decrease the quantity of digital homework, increasing the quality. So they should be moments communicated to families in advance where they can guide their children. Second is to converge all the materials in one single platforms so that parents can filter the navigation to that specific platform. So if you have both these recommendations, I think a step forward can be done.
Thank you so much. This has been very, not only engaging, it's great to get a world perspective. I thought I could throw in an Indian perspective because you know how high we are on academic performance. And I get it. If it's not a phone-free school, it should be. Most of our schools in India are phone-free and not even bell-to-bell. Kids just do not come with devices, nor are they school-led devices. But let me tell you, and I want to flag this, despite that, we have issues. We have kids on the phones, you know, after school, between 6 hours all the way to 18 hours because they're gaming, they're addicted. So phone free is a starter,
It is.
but it doesn't end.
It doesn't.
I just wanted to
Thank you.
flag
Yes.
that.
No, you're
yes?
great.
Thank you.
You know, because I see it. The second thing I wanted to, you know, I know that there is homework, and I've had a parent say, when I tell my child don't do homework online, he's like, I'm not going to print it because, you know, I'm an friendly world, and you know, he gives it back through climate change, and the parent is like, am I the wrong person here? Am I not conservative enough of what? You know, children are smart.
Yeah.
The second thing that I want to bring here is, see, the WHO guidelines for kids is 0 to 2 years, no screen time. 3 to 4 years, no screen time. 6 through 12, 1 hour a day. 12 through adults, 2 hours a day. None of us subscribe to it. And you know, when children see adults, whether it's the older sibling or the parents
Right.
continuously on the phone, it's even unfair to say, don't go get on the screen.
Right.
Because, you know, they learn what they see, not what they are told. So that's the second thing I want to leave here, saying it's not just about education anymore. It's actually brain development. It's about brain being hampered at a very young age. When parents have started to use it like a babysitter, the screen is like a babysitter. I'm on the phone, I'm cooking, I'm doing this, here's the screen. I just wanted to add that. And
So helpful.
I'd actually the question is on the brain, because I read that popcorn brains and, you know, digital dementia, they're already talking at a young age because the children are not getting a chance for the brain to fully develop because of the radiation in the screen time. So that is the real question.
Yes, we'll definitely come back this afternoon for our session on addiction, specifically to your point. But it is true that adolescents' brains are not able to handle the resistance to follow every impulse until mid-20s or so. So it's really unfair to give kids something that is going to encourage them to use it for as long as possible before they have the adult-like ability to stop themselves from engaging in that behavior.
Definitely.
Thank you so much for your points.
Hello, thank you very much for your presentation. My name is Baptiste. I'm a student, so not only I understand what you say, but I live it every day. And I can tell everyone in this room that you will never beat smartphones. Therefore, they must be put out of the school. They must never enter the perimeter of a school. I talk by experience. But the only issue is that they need to communicate. So they need to have a phone, that prepaid phone, you know, those things that you buy that nobody wants to have, but that just can send messages and get calls. But the only issue is that, as you said, as many of you mentioned, when you get home, you just want to get on that phone, look at Instagram, scroll all night to get back all the dopamine that you didn't have during the day. And how would you address this issue? How would you make sure that when they come home, they have something better to do? That's my question. Thank you very much.
Well, I can tell you that at MAMA, the way we describe our organization is that we are parents and allies fighting back against media addiction and creating a world where real life experiences and interaction remain at the heart of childhood. And recently I was at an event with a 17-year-old woman who got up and talked about starting at a new school and how worried she was because there were no phones there. And she had a lot of anxiety because she liked to be on her device. And she said it took 1 week And she was so much happier that what she wanted everyone to know is that this isn't a punishment, it's a gift. And so I think that the more we change the language around how we talk about this, and the more that we cultivate real life experiences and encourage students to meet up. There's a wonderful organization called Let Grow that provides schools with a idea of how to set up an after school opportunity for kids to hang out, phone free and no scripted program, but just hanging out. Children can be creative, young adults can be creative. For all of human history, our species has gotten together, we've mingled, we've played, we've been creative, we've had dances. And so, you know, sports is another thing. I think I have 3 sons, they love a lot of sports. My husband likes to ski. For the last 12 years, every single weekend, we go skiing. It used to drive me crazy. Now I am so grateful because my kids love to go outside. They don't care what the weather is. They just want to be active. And so the more you grow up with that kind of experience, the more normal it is, it's less of an issue.
Can I just add one sentence to this? I think it's very important to also teach children boredom is okay.
Yes.
You don't have to rush all the time from dopamine to dopamine. Life is boring sometimes. So what?
Well
Bring
said.
back boredom.
Boredom
said.
promotes creativity. Yeah.
And boredom also promotes frustration tolerance, which is a key ingredient to the executive function you need to have higher order of achievement academically and emotionally.
Right.
The point you brought up earlier about these higher order skills, I mean, I think that's the most important thing on the panel, what you said. I met a police chief from a major American city who told me that one of the reasons he thinks they have violence committed by police officers is because most of the new recruits have no experience talking to people.
Right.
They grew up chatting, so they didn't learn how to have conversations. So when they're walking the street and they say to somebody, you know, don't loiter there, and they talk back, they don't know how to handle
Snap.
conflict. They
Right.
automatically, you know, panic. They don't know how to have communication. So I agree with you, boredom's very important.
And I'll just say really quickly, Canadians love Switzerland for lots of reasons. I have a good friend who's here from Switzerland, but one of the things that Switzerland gave the world is when Einstein was working as a patent clerk in Bern, and he would go out and walk along the river. He was bored being a patent clerk, and he would look out into the river and he would see the eddies
Right.
swirling, and that gave him his theory of relativity
Right.
from that boredom. So if you think about the importance of boredom, it actually affects all of us because of something that happened right here in Switzerland.
Beautiful.
Wow.
That's great.
Beautiful transition because I'm Mario. I live in Bern, and
This wasn't
I'm
set
not
up.
a little Einstein, but I'm a digital wellness educator in Switzerland. And what I see in Switzerland, as you say, is on the one hand, there's a bit of a blaming game going on, right? The schools saying they're all left to do their own things, and they say we want the government to legislate. The government, driven by a libertarian, don't touch my device, and what I do in my private life kind of philosophy, say no, we're not going to legislate. So the schools keep doing their own, and then they say, well, the parents should do a bit more at home, and the parents say no, should be the school leading. But on the other hand, I see a beautiful culture where still very few kids at 9, 10, 12, 13 have smartphones. There's still so much to do in nature. Amazing playgrounds every 10 meters. As soon as you enter, however, these social economic backgrounds where, you know, your father works in a slaughterhouse at night and your mom after 7 o'clock as a cleaning lady, it's easy to just give an iPad.
Right.
And so I think Switzerland should sometimes be a bit smart in exporting what it does good, like these amazing playgrounds and a lot of outside activities, but also be careful that it's just fragmented and it springs. How would you tackle this issue of like fragmentation, right? Like I see beautiful offline clubs starting by teenagers themselves, and they wish that everybody understands how cool their experience is, and I wish every small reality gets somehow expanded in a certain way, right? And how would you address that issue of really fragmented experiences?
So one of the things that we're noticing is the importance of setting up phone rules for any experience that kids are going to be involved in. So whether that's sports or a sleepover with their friends or an extracurricular activity, setting up the rule that says this is a phone-free activity. So if you're going to come and you're going to make arts and crafts, or if you're going to play sports, then we're not bringing our phones, or we're locking away our phones for this device. Because too often what happens is kids are getting to these wonderful enrichment experiences, and they're being ruined by looking at their phones the whole time. Same for sleepovers, where parents can say to other parents, do not have your child bring their phone to this sleepover or this time that they're hanging out with their friends. You know, we're not having that. I just also wanted to say thank you so much for the work that you're doing. We should not be giving school-issued devices to anyone until we train them on how to use those devices, what the possible harms may be, and how their brain interacts with digital media. It is shocking to me that we kind of give unfettered access to very young children by giving them a free device, and we teach them nothing about the possible risks. We don't do that for anything else. Anything else that children get, they get a very lengthy, instructional, maybe even we test their competence before they're able to use the device or the tool or the experience. But we have now gotten into a culture of just handing them a possible addictive device, and they can use it for as many hours as they want.
Right, right. I think one of the ways you talked about fragmentation, I often talk about, you know, children exist in different layers of society, right? And if it's schools that are not going to take the charge and governments who are not willing to take the charge, and even sometimes homes, my hope is that other layers where children are interacting will slowly take the charge. Even pointing toward the partnership that Human Change has with UEFA here in Europe, right? Where a child shows up to play a game and it's a phone-free pitch, or in the ride between games, the managers are modeling not having their own phones out, or even verbally saying, we're not going to have our phones out, and here's a prompt question to ask the player sitting next to you or something. I just think those sort of things just start to infect in a good way, where they start to own it, the children themselves start to see it, and maybe that will start to create some of this change more organically.
And
Yeah.
No, we have a critique that Patti, Digitali and other initiatives like this are middle, upper class things. I don't think so, but we must admit that phone management opens up a bunch of other issues. So if the quality of your life, if the environment that is around your house is very bad, you have much more difficulties in carrying out this choice. So this is an open problem, and we must be aware that you have to have alternatives, really good alternatives to be able to do this. So this is a...
Yeah, good point.
There are other questions I know. Yes.
Hi, I'm a mother of 12 years old twins in Switzerland, so they have plenty of time
Yes.
to play outside. They are in the 6th grade and will go to the secondary school next year. And so my experience in the region of Zurich is that more than 95% of the kids entering the 2nd grade have their own cell phones. So my kids seems to accept that they're not gonna get a phone. I told them from a very young age on, it's gonna be very hard for you, but you have to know you won't get a phone before you're 15. So I still have a bit of room to negotiate down.
Right.
What I see is that they start to worry a bit that, oh, they're gonna become the last one or the only children without a phone. And I was just wondering, how can I help, or parents help their kids to navigate their relationship to other and navigate the fact that they have to explain, oh, I don't have a phone, because this is typically an age where we lose the influence as a parent and the child is becoming himself or herself. And I found this is a bit the link that is missing for me.
We teach a class to young people who have been using their phones for many years, and we ask them to take away their phones for a day. And they tell us, I wish that my parents did not give me a phone when they did. And it's okay to let kids know that those who have a phone now will later regret that they were given a phone so early. Also, kids tell us that they kind of like that they can blame their parents for not having a phone.
Right.
Because
right.
it makes them not feel like they are not cool. And they can say, well, it's just my parents and my school that made me do it.
Right.
But they're actually a bit relieved. So that can also really help.
Yeah, one of the things I was going to say, and by the way, I also have twins, so great, we're doing what we're surviving, barely, yes. I think we live in a time where we know less about the parents of the friends of our children than ever. Right? I remember growing up, my parents knew all of the parents of my friends intimately. And I think we have an opportunity to reach out to some of those parents in a bold way and to engage those parents to share why you've made the decision. And sometimes you give that parent permission to go, you give them the permission of going second almost because you've initiated the conversation around something that they were a little maybe afraid to even talk about. And sometimes those parents are open to opening up other doorways of communication between. Maybe their child has a smartphone, but you agree that they're going to text instead of using social media related to certain social functions. That was something that one of my children did because we opened up that doorway to say this is the only way they can communicate. They don't have Instagram. They don't have Snapchat. And you know what? They're not going to. But how can we still foster a friendship between them? And it was up to us as the parents to initiate that, to open up that doorway. You're welcome.
Would you allow one last question?
I think so.
Yes, yeah.
My name is Daniel Wolf. I'm a digital media educator from Germany. I've been working with more than 100,000 kids and teenagers over the last 4 years. And I specialize in everything that parents don't know.
Oh,
And I can tell you the worst things happen at night.
yes.
We need a global initiative or campaign, no screens at night.
Right. Totally agree.
That's something totally easy to educate.
Right.
Everyone can do that, but in order to do that, we as parents have to get used to it, to take out smartphones as well. And that's a difficult one.
Right.
Because
I agree.
when I ask parents, 100 parents, who of you uses their smartphones as an alarm? 90 hands go up. Children see that every day, every night, every morning. When I ask the kids, who of you has seen your parents taking their smartphones to the bedrooms at night? It's like 70%. And when I ask the kids, who of you even is allowed to eventually take their own devices to bed? It's more than half. More than half. And if I ask them how long they stay up, secretly, because they all turn down the volume, they turn down the brightness, and when they're sure parents don't get it or don't even realize even when they enter the room, the real addiction starts.
Right.
We
Porn happens,
That's right.
cyberbullying happens,
Right.
the traumatizing content happens. So we definitely, that's my experience. So we do need, if you want anything good from a smartphone-free childhood, we need to start with the nights.
It's not just your experience. I mean, the data bears this out now. Meta was forced to release some data after there were lawsuits by attorneys general in the United States. And in their data, it shows they know how many 13-year-olds, how many 12-year-olds are still on Instagram at midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m. on school nights. So it's not just your experience.
But that's only what parents, you know?
Right.
Most children don't even tell. No one knows. No one except the big platforms.
The big platforms, and there isn't transparency. So,
Yeah.
what
That's
I
a
can
great point.
what I can
Yeah.
tell you, I mean, I think your idea is exactly right. Part of why I started Mama was because I knew if we had the regulation in place, it's not enough to make the change if parents are still giving the devices to children in the strollers and at night. If we have the cultural change, but we don't have the regulations in place to enforce it, then it's not going to matter either because these products are so effective at addicting us. And that what we really need is a national and international, as you said, education campaign. We did not have mass literacy, for example, in the United States, even 150 years ago. It required a lot of public education. We achieved public health through public education and advertising campaigns. So, at Mama, we have several of these campaigns ready to go. We've been working with some of the most talented people in the marketing world. We're still fundraising for that work. But I couldn't agree with you more that that's a great starting point to help parents understand at scale how they can make a huge difference in keeping their children safe at home.
And Julie, to give you the final word, if someone in the audience would like for their child's school to go phone free, the first thing they should do is?
Visit joinmama.org and we will provide you with resources and templates, or Protect Young Eyes.
Same.
They have
Yep.
wonderful guides and questions that you can go back to your teachers and your schools and ask them to start thinking more clearly about what exactly they are providing to children in terms of benefits and also risks.
Excellent.
Thank you so much. I'd like to thank our panelists.
Thank you, Mitch.
And I'd like to invite our panelists to the lounge to answer questions. And you can go ahead and take off your mics and head there right now, please. And I would like to thank all of you for coming very much. You can stay for a reception and several more panels throughout the rest of the day today, tomorrow, and on Thursday. Thank you so much for your attention. And please, if you have questions, join us in the lounge to talk to our panelists.